Big 12 college football coaches on the hot seat in 2022. Are there any? There might not be any coaches get fired out of the Big 12 during or immediately following this 2022 season. There's a couple of coaches, I think, though, that could be heading or slipping that direction, maybe. But I don't know if there'll actually be any fired at the end of 2022. I've done a whole series of these videos. I did the SEC, the ACC, and the Big Ten already. If you just scroll back a few videos over the last couple of weeks, you can find those if you're interested. The SEC, the ACC, and the Big Ten coaches. Big 12 now, due to Pac-12 maybe tomorrow to wrap this series up. But, well, let's start with some coaches that we know definitely aren't on the hot seat in 2022 in the Big 12 because they're first-year coaches, right? We have three, right? Is that right? Three new coaches in the Big 12 for 2022. Texas Tech, TCU, and, of course, Oklahoma. We'll start with Oklahoma. They bring in Brent Venables from Clemson, longtime defensive coordinator there under Dabo Swinney. And, of course, Brent Venables came from Oklahoma to start with when Dabo hired him away from Oklahoma, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So lots of ties to Oklahoma. An interesting hire, I think, for Oklahoma, going from Lincoln Riley, one of the best offensive minds in football, to sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Brent Venables, of course, a defensive guy. And defense has been the issue at Oklahoma really every year under Lincoln Riley. Great offenses. Some of the best offenses we've seen in all of college football over the last 15 or 20 years has been some of these Oklahoma offenses under Lincoln Riley, but the defense was just abysmal. So, I kind of understand. I don't know if maybe they're not over. Could they be overcorrecting by switching to a defensive guy? I don't know. We'll see. Brent Venables is definitely an elite defensive mind. One of the best defensive coordinators in college football. Right? You start talking about elite defensive minds. Of course, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart. But Brent Venables is right there after that in terms of defensive coordinators now. We don't know what he's going to do as a head coach yet. It's always a risk to change head coaches. You never really know how it's going to work out, especially when you hire somebody that's never been a head coach before, right? Because being a head coach is not the same as being a coordinator. Being a head coach takes a different set of skills than being a coordinator. So we've seen this work out for some schools, and we've seen it not work out for others, right? Obviously, it's worked out for Georgia. They went and got Kirby Smart. He had never been a head coach before. That's worked out pretty well. There's several examples like that. And then you have Will Muschamp, right? Great defensive mind, not a very good head coach. Jeremy Pruitt, great defensive mind, not a very good head coach. So it can go either way. Now, Venables has worked under some great head coaches, so I think he's got an advantage and a leg up there. How do I feel about the hire? I think it's a pretty good hire. I'm kind of surprised. I'm kind of surprised that Oklahoma, not that Brent Venables isn't a big name, but I'm just kind of surprised that Oklahoma wasn't able or didn't want to get someone with some experience. Oklahoma, there's not 5 teams that have been better than Oklahoma over the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, consistently 10, 11, 12 wins a year, winning the Big 12 almost every single year up until last year. So we'll see how it works out. I know the Oklahoma fans are excited, and I don't blame them. Watching those offenses was amazing, but when you say the defense was bad at Oklahoma, that's the understatement of the year. I mean, their defense was just absolutely horrible. So it'll definitely get better under Brent Venables, but so no, he's not on the. You can't be on the hot seat in your first year. So scratch him off the list. Texas Tech, they went out and hired Joey McGuire. You may not be familiar with that name. I knew the name. I remember when he was hired towards the end of last season. But I'll be honest, I didn't know a whole lot about Joey McGuire, so I had to look into it a little bit. But long time Texas high school football coach, multiple state titles. Texas high school football, which it don't get no bigger than Texas high school football. He spent the last 4 years at Baylor. Started out as a tight ends coach, then I believe a defensive ends coach, and the last 2 years he was what do they call it? Associate head coach. The last 2 years at Baylor. of course, under their head coach, Dave Aranda. So not a ton of experience in the world of college football, just the 4 years at Baylor. Now he gets hired as head coach at Texas Tech. But the guy knows the state of Texas, and apparently he knows how to recruit. He improved Texas Tech's recruiting class 31 spots from the time he was hired to signing day. That's a lot. Now, Texas Tech is still way behind, of course, Texas when it comes to recruiting in the Big 12 and Texas A&M, and even Baylor to a smaller degree. But usually, well, a lot of times it can be hard to, that first recruiting class when you don't get hired until November or December, an early signing period is the second week of December, and then the late signing period is only a couple of months away, the beginning of February. That's not a lot of time for a new head coach to go out, meet all the recruits that the school has been targeting, try to decide who do they want, who do they not want, go out. Anyway, he did a pretty good job improving 31 spots over that period of time. So again, with a guy that's never been a head coach before, and in this case doesn't even have a lot of college experience at all, just 4 years at Baylor, it's a crapshoot to change coaches, and you never really know what you're going to get. Just like with Venables, the guy's never been head coach before, but he can recruit. He knows the state of Texas. He's been there. He's been coaching in the state of Texas, high school and college level, for the better part of the last 30 years. So the guy knows the state of Texas. I do think he'll be able to increase the talent level at Texas Tech. How good of a head coach does he end up being? Well, we just don't know, but he's not on the hot seat. You're not on the hot seat first, you're just like Venables. And the same thing for TCU. TCU goes out and hires Sonny Dykes, who turned SMU around. SMU was great back in the 80s, right? Until they got caught buying players. The death penalty. You have to look into it, but and they basically disappeared forever until the last 2 or 3 years, and all of a sudden you started hearing people talk about SMU again. They were ranked in the top 25 multiple times. That's Sonny Dykes. Now he was at Cal prior to that, and it didn't really work out there. He didn't do well there, but he got a shot at SMU, and he turned it around. And now TCU has gone out and hired him, replacing. What's that coach's name TCU had? Well, they had him forever, too. Drawing a blank on his name now. I liked him. But they got, TCU decided, to go a different direction, part ways, and so they bring Sonny Dykes in. So not on the hot seat in the first year. A good hire, I think. I like the Sonny Dykes hire, and I actually like the Joey McGuire hire, too. I mean, you got to, look, Texas Tech and TCU, they're not getting Brent Venables. They're not getting Brian Kelly. They're not getting Lincoln Riley, right? For what they are, I think Texas Tech and TCU made pretty good hires. So those are your three new head coaches in the Big 12. So no, they're not on the hot seat. Kansas has a coach heading into their second year. Lance Leopold, is that his name? 2-10 last year. But they did beat Texas. That's right. Kansas went 2-10. Only one win in the conference, and that was against Texas. Their other win was against like South Dakota or some low-level middle school team. So terrible. But this is Kansas. The expectations just aren't very high. I know Les Miles didn't do great there, but Les Miles didn't get fired because they weren't winning a lot of games. We all know what happened with the Les Miles thing. It was just too much bad publicity started piling up on him, and then the stuff coming out from his time at LSU. So, Kansas just decided to get rid of him. But is a coach ever really on the hot seat at Kansas? I mean, you hate to pick on a team like Kansas. They're kind of like the Vandy of the Midwest. I mean, they're I don't think they're ever really going to be that great of a football program. They've had a year or two here and there. What is it, like the mid to late 2000s maybe? They had a couple of years where they won 9-10 games, maybe even a little more. But just in general, expectations just not that high at Kansas for their football program. So, a guy, even though he went 2-10 last year, Lance Leopold, a Kansas head coach in year 2 is not on the hot seat for anything football related. The only way they get rid of Lance Leopold anytime this year or after this season would be a Les Miles situation where you have off the field issues. So I don't think he's on the hot seat. But here's one that might be on the hot seat. Neil Brown. What a disappointment this guy's been at West Virginia. They had Dana Holgorsen there before that, and to this day, I don't understand why West Virginia fans were in such a hurry to get rid of Dana Holgorsen. Just look what Dana Holgorsen has done since he left West Virginia, and look at what West Virginia has done since he left West Virginia. He goes to Houston. He leaves West Virginia, goes to Houston. The West Virginia fans acted like they were happy about it. I didn't understand it at the time, and the more time that goes by, I think the less I understand it. He leaves and goes to a Group of 5 team, Houston. Today, Houston is a better team than West Virginia. Houston might be the best Group of 5 team in America this coming season. Meanwhile, you've got Neil Brown, and all this guy has done is gone out and go 5-7, 6-4, 6-7 last year. It hasn't been good. It hasn't been good. Now, they do bring in a couple of pieces this year that to me are interesting. JT Daniels, transfer quarterback from Georgia at Southern Cal prior to that, right? Reunited with new offensive coordinator at West Virginia, Graham Harrell, who was JT Daniels' offensive coordinator in his time at Southern Cal. I feel like Neil Brown needs to win some games this year. I'm talking 8+ at least. Anything less than 8-4, I think, this season for Neil Brown, and he will be on the hot seat next year. I don't think West Virginia is going to fire Neil Brown this year, even if he has a season sort of like what he's had in the 3 years he's been there already. You know, hovering in the 5, 6, 7 win range. That's not good for West Virginia, and it's still a downward trajectory based on what Dana Holgorsen was doing for West Virginia. Again, I just feel like, you know, year 3, it's not like he's had that one odd year where he was 2-10 or something. So I don't think he's on the hot seat this year. I think it would take like a historically bad season this year for West Virginia to even consider parting ways with Neil Brown this season. But if there's no improvement this year, if you have another year of, like I said, the 5 or 6 wins, then I think the heat will be turned up next season. So I guess I'm not putting Neil Brown on the hot seat for this year because I don't feel like West Virginia will move on from him this year. But it's poop or get off the pot time, in my opinion, for Neil Brown. Chris Kleiman, whatever it is at Kansas State, not on the hot seat. Only been there 3 years. And actually, he's done pretty well quietly. I feel like a lot of people don't talk about Kansas State. Now, they had a bad year in 2020, but that was the COVID deal. What did they win? 4 games or whatever it was. Yeah. They were 4-6 in the COVID year. But the other 2 years he's been there, 2019 and 2021, 8-5. Now, 8-5, I mean, that's not winning you any Big 12 titles or making playoff appearances, but 8-5 is not bad. I mean, it's above average. Above average, 8-5, Chris Kleiman. And he's a young guy, and I think he's still got a lot of potential. I don't know if that potential can ever be reached at Kansas State. Not a knock on Kansas State. I'm just saying, what do you think would happen if Kansas State goes 10-2 this year and 10-2 next year? What do you think would happen? People would be trying to hire him away from Kansas State. Would he leave Kansas State? Well, they always say no until they say yes, usually. So, no, he's not on the hot seat. 2 of his 3 years at Kansas State have been really good. And even the bad year, you can write that off as COVID and say, well, no one even really cares. So, yeah, no, he's not on the hot seat. Chris Kleiman, Kansas State. Texas, Steve Sarkeesian. Now, this is an interesting one to me. I am not sold on Steve Sarkeesian. 5-7 last year. I mean, that's not good. Texas has a lot of talent. A lot of talent. Go back and check the recruiting rankings the past 3, 4, 5 years. Texas is loaded with talent. Now, they're missing some pieces, or they were missing pieces in some key positions and things like that, and that can hurt, no doubt. But 5-7 is unacceptable for Texas. It should be anyway. Now, that was his first year, so no, he's not on the hot seat. And here's my question, because Texas has been changing coaches pretty much every 2-3 years. I mean, Tom Herman, what was the guy before that? Was it Charlie Strong? Anyway, Texas is set to join the SEC sometime between now and 2025, right? It would not be good, in my opinion, if Texas found themselves in a situation where they're changing coaches. Let's say Sarkeesian were to go 6-6 this year or 7-5, which is still unacceptable. And then next year in 2023, same thing. 5, 6, 7 wins again. Okay, under normal circumstances and conditions, I think Texas would look at that and go, no, we're getting rid of you. I don't know if it's a good idea for Texas to be looking to change coaches a year before entering the SEC, or even worse, the year they do enter it. It seems to me like when you're getting ready to make the move to the SEC, you want some stability in the program. You want some coaching stability. Now, I don't think Texas is going 5-7 this year. I think Texas has the potential to be a really good team this year. I think Texas could win the Big 12 this year. So I'm not here to dump on Sarkeesian. But when I say I think Texas can win the Big 12, that's based on the talent that's on that roster. That's based on the fact that Oklahoma brought in Brent Venables, a defensive guy. Oklahoma doesn't have any defensive talent, and half their offensive talent transferred out. So I have some questions about Oklahoma this season. And then you look at last year, Baylor and Oklahoma State playing in the Big 12 title game, and you're going, okay, so you're telling me Oklahoma finally misses out on a Big 12 title game, and the two teams that are there to pick up the pieces are Baylor and Oklahoma State, not Texas? So I get it, and it was his first year, so, you let that slide. Texas had a lead at halftime, and I think all 7 of those losses. It was a weird season for Texas, and then of course the loss to Kansas is just, you just can't do that. I mean, that's just it. But hey, look, Kirby lost to Vandy his first year at Georgia. His second year, he went to a national title game. So it's not, it doesn't mean Sarkeesian's not any good or never going to get Texas where they want to go. But last year was not good, 5-7. Even with going 5-7, still able to sign a top 5 recruiting class, which brings me back to the point. Talent is not the issue at Texas. It hasn't been the issue at Texas in years. Texas recruits in the top 10 almost every single year. They're at a minimum the second most talented team in the Big 12 every single year. Maybe you put Oklahoma ahead of them depending on recruiting rankings over any random 3 or 4 year period. But Texas recruits at a staggering level. And the fact that they really haven't been able to do anything, not even in the Big 12 in over a decade, is surprising and alarming and concerning and embarrassing. And if you're a Texas man, it should be humiliating. Will that change this year? There are some things pointing in that direction for Texas, so we'll see. But no. So say all that to say this. Sarkeesian is not on the hot seat. He's just not. You know who else ain't on the hot seat? Matt Campbell at Iowa State. He's on the permanent seat. I talked about Chris Kleeman and what would happen if Kansas State went 10-2 for a couple of years, right? Other teams would come looking for him. Well, that happened with Iowa State. There was people that wanted Matt Campbell. Last year they were ranked in the top 10 in the preseason. They returned almost their entire roster from the 2020 season, and it was an epic fail last year. Just a huge disappointment. These yard workers, I swear these yard workers purposely wait until I'm to go there and tell them I'm doing loot tube, bitch. Sorry. Maybe I'll edit that out. Anyway, no, I'll leave it in. What was I saying? Oh, Matt Campbell. So no, he's not on the hot seat. Iowa State loves him. But he had opportunities to go elsewhere and he turned them down. And now it looks like Iowa State going to be young this year. Last year was the year for Iowa State. Because of the super senior rules, they were able to return a ton of veteran experience. And, they're never going to out-recruit Oklahoma and Texas, or probably any of the schools in Texas for that matter. They're going to be at or near the bottom in recruiting at a Big 12 almost every single year. But Matt Campbell's one of those guys you hear him say all the time, oh, he gets the most out of the talent he has available to him. Well, yeah. But last year, like I said, Texas goes 5-7 last year. Iowa State was in the preseason top 10 every single poll, right? If I'd have told you last August, I'm a time traveler. I've been to the end of the season. I can tell you 2 things right now. Texas is going to go 5-7, and Oklahoma is not going to be in the Big 12 title game. Iowa State would have said, well, that's great. That means we will be. Yeah, you should have been, but you weren't. You let Oklahoma State and Baylor get in there. Not a good season for Iowa State and Matt Campbell last year, considering all they had coming back. But he's not on the hot seat. They love him there. Mike Gundy, boy, this guy is old as Methuselah. Remember the whole, I'm a man, I'm 40? Pretty soon he can redo that. I'm a man, I'm 60. He's been at Oklahoma State forever and a day. The dude's been there forever. 2005? 17 years he's been there. Long time. It had a great season last year, of course, winning the Big 12 title, beat Baylor in the Big 12 title game, went on to the Sugar Bowl and beat Ole Miss, 11-2, 12-2, whatever they were. Great season for Oklahoma State. And Oklahoma State's had a lot of good seasons, right? He's won 10-plus games 7 or 8 times that he's been there. I don't know if I wrote that down or not. No, beat Notre Dame. I went up to my Ole Miss. They beat Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl. Sorry, that was Baylor that beat Ole Miss. So Oklahoma State, 12-2 last year, beat Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl. 7 seasons out of what did I say? He's been there since going into his 17th year. So almost half the time, 7 out of 16 seasons, he's 10 wins or more. They rarely break through like they did last year and go and win the Big 12 or whatever. So that was a great year. But lots of New Year's Six games, lots of BCS games before the New Year's Six was a thing, back when we just had the BCS. Lots of BCS bowl games, lots of New Year's Six bowl games, lots of 10-win seasons. He's not going anywhere. He can retire. He can stay there till he keels over. I mean, they're just not going to get rid of him. He's been there forever. And that's not going to change. So, no, not on the hot seat. And I saved this for last. Is Dave Aranda the best coach in the Big 12? Tell me who's better. Tell me who's better. Maybe Gundy? It's either Gundy or Aranda. What a turnaround for Baylor. 2-7 in Aranda's first season. I think that's what it was. The COVID year. That was his first year there. 2-7. Well, you throw that out the window. First year coaches that had to coach in that COVID year, they were at a huge disadvantage. Huge disadvantage. But last year, 12-2. And wait a minute. Did Baylor? Oklahoma State didn't win the Big 12. Baylor won that game. Oklahoma State almost won it at the end, got tackled on the goal line. I pay very close attention to the Big 12, by the way. But yeah, Baylor won, not Oklahoma State. And then Baylor went on to beat. Well, I got all kinds of confused when I got to these last two coaches. Didn't know what Oklahoma State and Baylor. I said Oklahoma State won the Big 12 and then beat Ole Miss in a bowl game. No, Oklahoma State lost the Big 12 title game and then beat Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl. Baylor and Dave Aranda won the Big 12 title game and then beat Ole Miss in the Sugar Bowl. That makes a lot more sense and sounds a lot better. So, no, Dave Aranda not on the hot seat and might be the best coach in the Big 12. I mean, you got to go with him or Gundy at this point. Now, we don't know. Brent Venables, unlimited potential, but the guy's never coached a game. So I don't want to hear anything about, Brent Venables is the best coach in the Big 12. The guy's never coached a game, man. What are you talking about? He may be the best coach in the Big 12 at this time next year, but can we watch the guy coach a game first? Thank you. Also in 2, addition to that as well. So there you go. So I really don't know. Maybe, if West Virginia does something completely ridiculous, like 2-10 or something, maybe they'll fire Neil Brown. I don't think they're going to be that bad, though. I like Graham Harrell and JT Daniels, that combination there, quarterback at OC. If they can find some playmakers, I think West Virginia can put up some numbers. I mean, JT Daniels can throw the ball 35, 40 times a game. I've seen him do it. If you can do it at Georgia, you can do it anywhere, because Georgia's allergic to throwing the ball. But anyway, there you go. Big 12 coaches on the hot seat. Ain't nan. I really don't think there is any. Being the head coach at Texas is always precarious. They fire you at any moment, but with them getting ready to join the SEC, I don't know. Especially if Texas has a good year this year. No, you'll be good to go with Sarkeesian for a while. Neil Brown would probably be the one. If you had to put anybody on the hot seat out of the Big 12, I guess it would be Neil Brown. But anyway, there you go. Way too long, pointless video about Big 12 coaches.